Okay, so we all hear about planes crashing all the time, but what about submarines? It seems as though explosions or implosions underwater never really make it to the news. But guess what? Accidents involving subs are way more common than people think. Since the year 2000 alone, there have been 30 major submarine accidents around the world. In today's video, we dig into some of the worst sub accidents of all time. Russian K-141 Kursk. The Russian K-141 Kursk was an Oscar II class submarine built in 1994, and 7 years after it was built, the sub found itself in the middle of a military exercise in the Arctic Circle.
Банальная задача лодки скрытно подойти к главному кораблю и нанести по нему удар.
Suddenly sank to the bottom of the Barents Sea with all hands on board due to the leakage of hydrogen peroxide, a liquid fuel that is known to be a highly volatile material. It turns out, when the crew loaded a dummy 6576 kit torpedo, a faulty weld in the casing leaked the high-test peroxide into the torpedo tube, triggering a catalytic explosion that killed all 118 crew members on board. The first explosion was followed by a second, bigger detonation of several nearby torpedoes. This second explosion was so big, seismographic stations all the way in Alaska were able to pick it up. Even so, 23 members of the crew somehow managed to survive both blasts while fencing themselves at the back of the sunken vessel. Despite frantic efforts to rescue them, Russian President Vladimir Putin refused to get international help, including from the US Navy, for 5 days before eventually giving in to the pressure. Unfortunately, by that time, all 23 died.
Там, конечно, очень тяжело было и плакали.
After the incident, the Russians completely banned the use of hydrogen peroxide-fueled missiles. About time, I'd say. USS Scorpion, SSN 589. And while Russia and the Soviets have had their fair share of sub-tragedies, the US Navy has lost submarines too. On May 22, 1969, the USS Scorpion, a skipjack-class attack submarine, went missing about 400 miles southwest of the Azores Islands. For days, the US Navy refused to provide any details about what led to the deadly accident.
The submarine was scheduled to return to Norfolk at 1 p.m. today at the conclusion of a routine extended training operation with
An all-out air, surface, and subsurface search is currently underway in the entire Atlantic Command.
Later that year, the wreck was found under 10,000 feet of water by a US Navy research ship. According to independent sources, the most likely cause was the accidental activation of a Mark 37 torpedo that resulted in an explosion whose battery cells overheated and exploded, causing a devastating fire. 5 months later, the US Navy officially confirmed that the wrecked sub was found 10,000 feet underwater at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
I obtained several thousand pages related to the Scorpion's maintenance history from the Atlantic Submarine Fleet. I had sent out half a dozen requests under the Freedom of Information Act, and it just so happens they found these documents that they thought had been destroyed. Buried amid thousands of pages was the day-by-day history of how the Scorpion was selected in a secret program that drastically reduced the maintenance that it would have ordinarily received.
To date, the loss of the Scorpion remains shrouded in mystery, giving rise to dozens of conspiracy theories ever since. USS Thresher. The sinking of the USS Thresher, SSN 593, is regarded as one of the worst sub-accidents in the history of the US Navy. On the 10th of April 1963, the sub imploded during a test run about 250 miles off Cape Cod, traveling at a depth of about 1,300 feet. The USS Thresher was the lead boat in a class of 3,700-ton nuclear-powered attack submarines, all due to a simple piping failure? Hard to believe, right? After months of study, a Naval Board of Inquiry found that a failure in the vessel's internal piping system in the engine room subjected the sub's interior to a violent spray of water, leading to flooding. As the water and spray shorted out the vital electrical circuits, there was a major loss of propulsion power. Without the power to propel itself, the main ballast started to rise, and the sub began to sink. Remember, modern subs rely on power to propel them to the surface, especially from great depths. And if the Thresher's nuclear reactor shut down because of a short circuit, it means that she was only left with a diesel system to churn the propeller. As the ship filled with water, the auxiliary's power could just not have been enough to push Thresher to the surface. Ever since, the US Navy has adopted a number of safety standards to stop something like this from happening again. Mind you, the Thresher was the world's first nuclear-powered submarine to ever be lost at sea, and the most advanced submarine in the world at the time, capable of reaching depths and speeds not possible a decade before it was built to counter the growing threat of Soviet submarines. But for all these grand ambitions, today it remains the highest ever death toll in a sub-accident. K-278 Komsomolets. The K-278 was the only boat of the Project 685 Plavnik class ever completed. A testbed for new technologies, this 8,000-ton Komsomolets was one of the highest performance submarines at the time, with an operating depth greater than 300 feet. Part of the Soviet ambition to build titanium pressure hulls, the sub sank on April 7, 1989, when a fire broke out in the aft section of the sub, causing a short circuit. Buried over 300 meters under the Sea of Norway, the electrical fire hurled 8,000 psi of air around, harming the oil system. As the oil spilled into the heated turbine, it triggered a much bigger fire, making matters progressively worse for the submarine and its crew. The pressurized air gouts fueled the advancing fire, which tripped the nuclear reactor's emergency shutdown and knocked out power to the sub's hydraulic system. Despite the heroic efforts of the crew, 42 of the 69 crew members were killed during the accident, although only 4 people died as a direct result of the fire, with the rest dying from exposure. More of the crew might have been saved if the Soviet Navy had acted in time. With 2 nuclear warheads still on board the damaged hull, some 5,500 feet underwater in the sea, talk about a disaster still waiting to happen. Ming 361. The Ming 361, or the Great Wall, was a diesel-electric sub operated by the Chinese Navy, part of the country's North Sea Fleet based at the Liaoning province at the time of the accident in April 2003. The sub was conducting a peacetime military exercise in the Yellow Sea between Korea and Shandong, when a mechanical failure killed all 70 men on board. Later that month, a group of Chinese fishermen found the half submerged while plying their nets in the Bohai Sea, just off the Chinese coast. The boat was towed from the accident site to its home port at Qingdao. Not surprisingly, Chinese officials kept a tight lip about the cause of the incident.
PLA announced that human errors and mechanical failure caused the tragedy. But that's not true. Quoting sources from within the Navy, the book, The Real Stories of Jiang Zemin, revealed that the accident was a suicidal act. Former CCP leader Jiang Zemin replaced many PLA officers with his own people in the name of military reform. A soon-to-be retired naval officer was resentful and shut off the submarine's air intake valve, killing everyone on board.
But one of the leading theories is that the diesel generator malfunctioned and failed to shut down properly, using up all the oxygen inside the sub. The entire crew suffocated to death almost instantly, without any idea of what's happening. The crippled sub stayed afloat for 10 days. Today, the Ming disaster is remembered as one of China's worst naval disasters. USS Greenville. What happens when the sub traveling underwater collides with a ship cruising over water? Well, this is exactly what happened on 9th of February 2001, when an American sub, the USS Greenville, struck Ehime Maru, a Japanese fisheries training ship. As the Greenville slowed and the commanding officer looked into the periscope, he realized that the sub's rudder tore through the fishing vessel's lower deck. Within minutes, the Japanese ship sank. I mean, literally, in just 5 seconds, the ship lost all power, including all backup systems on the emergency circuit. 9 crew members were killed, including 4 high school students, while others found themselves wading through an ankle-deep mixture of oil and water. The unfortunate accident happened while both vessels were only 10 minutes off the coast of Oahu. There you have it, some of the worst sub-accidents in history. Operating in the deep sea, subs are one of the riskiest ways to travel. From the crushing water pressure outside to the fact that even the smallest leak or fire can prove fatal for all those on board. Whether it's loss of radioactive liquid coolant, leaked fuel, a piping failure, or a fire in the engine room, a lot can go wrong. If you liked this video, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss out on more cool submarine content from our side.